So, welcome to my second video on this channel, which is kind of crazy. So, the first video, I really enjoyed making it, and then I had people asking me when the second one was coming out, so here it is, folks. I have decided to do a video essay today because it was very recommended, so I listen, folks, I listen. I want to kind of do as many different styles as I can. So if you enjoy this, please let me know in the comments or whatever. Today I want to talk about basically a crash course in the history of punk. A lot of this is coming from a blog that I found, and it's got a lot of great information, and it talks a lot about the musical instruments and the tech that a lot of these bands would have used and still do today. So I will link that in the description. And yeah, anything else I reference in here, I will link. So the first thing I want to talk about is where the punk movement started, which a lot of people believe that it started in England. It did not. It started in America with a band called the Ramones. The Ramones' self-titled debut album, released April 23rd, 1976, was widely regarded as the first true punk rock album and their early infiltration of the punk rock scene. And it's kind of hard to say where the punk movement really started, because in a way, rebelling has always been something that people do. And up until the mid-70s, alternative people didn't necessarily look alternative. They more had alternative views. That's not to say hippies aren't alternative, but alternative in the way of punk. The Ramones absolutely freaking goated. Oh, listen to, I don't know, Sheena is a punk rocker. The whole Rocket Ship to Russia album is amazing. Yeah, they had an idea and they ran with it, and it's like a beautiful substance. Following the Ramones was the bands like Sex Pistols and The Clash, and they kind of had the same kind of substance to their music, and their performances were chaotic, and they were actively using drugs and were rebelling against so many ideas that authoritarians had in that specific area, especially in England at the time too. We're going to talk about the Iron Lady in a minute. I could talk about her influence on the punk movement for decades. That sort of thing was sought after. The masses wanted rebellion. They wanted to break these norms that had been suffocating them for so long. And that's why the punk movement was so important to happen when it did. So most of this happened in the mid-70s. And I know when you think about punk, you think about the 80s, the new wave, the post-punk, bold black makeup, often affiliated with the gothic scene as well. So many things like that. And that is what punk looks like. But you have to remember that over the 4 main decades that it happens, the 70s to the 90s, punk and goth and all its subcultures, they took so many changes to how they presented. And that was a big part of punk. Now, punk is very heavily music-based, but it's also politics-based, and it's socially based, and it's economically based, and there's so many fragments of punk that make it the structure that it is. It's very complicated, but it's also so straightforward, if that's explaining it well, which I know it's not. The way you looked and the way you dressed had such a big influence on how you were perceived, especially in the 70s and 80s and so on. How you looked, it wasn't necessarily your status, but it was your attitude towards authority. It was your attitudes towards societal norms. And I know saying that makes me sound super nitpicky, but like that's genuinely what it was. With the punk movement came a lot of DIY ethos, which it's this idea that you don't need to buy your style. Wearing this ratty old shirt that you fixed up is in fact punk. It's punk rock, and cutting the necklines out of your shirts is punk rock. Crusting your pants, like if you know what, I'll put a photo on them. If you know what, like crust pants, crust jackets, crust hats, all these things that were kind of the fundamental root of punk. But DIY and, dyeing your hair, looking punk rock was punk rock. And I think that is also a very fundamental part of the punk movement. At the time, they were under the fist of the Iron Lady. And if you do not know who the Iron Lady is, it is this lovely woman. Look at her beautiful face. Margaret Thatcher. Margaret Thatcher. We can talk about Margaret. The best way to summarize how she influenced the punk movement is the movie Billy Elliot. If you have not seen the movie Billy Elliot, I would so deeply recommend watching it. It was made in the early 2000s, I do believe, but it's this beautiful representation of the mid-80s, and Billy Elliot's this boy who likes, I just want to dance the ballet, and he's got this passion, and his passion is for dancing, and I know I'm going on a tangent, but stay with me here. His passion is for ballet, it's for dancing, and it's seen as feminine, and he's not allowed to do it because of that reason. And the story is kind of him rebelling against those ideas, and I think the movie is fundamentally punk rock. It's this boy who's got a knack for something, he's got a passion, he's got love for something. He breaks down these barriers of societal norms, and he goes against a bunch of skinheads, so, it is a little bit punk rock, okay? But the movie, it touches on these alternative themes, and, this is grade 10 me having to write an essay on this, but, it was genuinely, it's a fantastic film, and I would recommend watching it if you want some more, context, into how punk rock kind of affected society and affected children growing up and kind of shaped lives. That was a tangent, I know. I think that movie really, it's punk rock in quiet ways, and I think that it's punk rock in gentle ways. And I know that's kind of juxtaposing, but go watch the movie. I promise you it's worth the hour and a half. And so moving into the mid-70s, I know this is all happening in the 70s. I promise it gets to the 80s. The 70s was kind of where this hefty amount of punk music came from. The mid-70s were a time that punk kind of, it didn't break, but it split in a way. Punk admirers kind of went a different way, and that created post-punk and new wave. Some of these bands include The Smiths, Joy Division, The Buzzcocks, The Cure, Talking Heads, things like The Alarm, which kind of came more in the 80s, but it is still a fundamental part of post-punk and new wave, and the rise of new wave and post-punk kind of led the punk movement not astray, but in a different trajectory, and it's what shaped the synthy kind of feeling of the 80s, and so much 80s alternative music it's all based on punk, but it comes from a lot of new wave and post-punk creations and kind of what they incorporated into their music. The split that post-punk and new wave had taken kind of left punk in its rawest form. And this is kind of where all of the hard punk came from. Not to say that the Sex Pistols and the Ramones and the Clash hadn't been hard punk, but this raw form of punk had grown. Bands like the Dead Kennedys and Misfits, which, if you appreciate horror punk like I do, guys, Blitzkid, The Damned, the Cramps, all these iconic bands of the 80s that influenced so many other bands along the line. They were all kind of born in this era, and they all thrived in this era, and still staples today in alternative music. It's such a great period of punk, and it really shaped the entire movement genuinely overall. The 90s and the 2000s, mainly the 90s, because the 70s, 80s, and 90s are the periods of punk music I know best. So I can't talk extensively on the 2000s like I can the 70s and 80s. But the 90s were like a pivotal time. Bands like Green Day and The Offspring, they kind of rose to their fame during this time. Again, known for abusing drugs and having these crazy, like wacky kind of weird shows that just encapsulated their audience in this effective kind of passion for punk music. And yeah, a lot of influential bands came in this time also. Things like Blink-182 and Descendants and Foo Fighters, which I've seen live. Bands like Sleater-Kinney, like these staples and things that like I've grown up on. I know so many of you have grown up on just fundamentally alternative music, and it's so, the 90s were like a huge time for this, and like I can't lie, though I do favor the 80s obviously, but I have such a spot in my heart for the like 90s punk music. It's just so detailed, and it's so, yeah, it's such an art. It kind of incorporates this skater like rat baggy kind of mood. It just got newer, and that kind of growth of the punk movement is kind of what it was all about in the first place. It's this anti-disestablishment, hatred for the people in power, like this sticking it to the man. It's always changing. It's always going to be something new, and the 90s like is such a good encapsulation of that. And it's keeping those punk values, making them your own in a way, keeping those punk values and fundamentally what punk stands on, but showing yourself in a different light that hasn't been tried yet, and it's new and it's exciting. That's kind of what 90s punk was about. The 2000s were very similar to 90s punk as well, and the only other thing I can say is stylistically, it was a lot more skatery, and it was a lot more teenage dirtbag. You think of like those kind of like 2000s older brothers type shit. I don't know how to phrase it well, but things like that they stood on the fundamentals of punk rock, and that was how punk rock was kept alive in that era, with a lot of the 90s and 2000s drawing from 70s and 80s punk fashion, and really being like open about their political views and being unafraid about their political views. Protestation, huge in this period of time. In these past 40 years I've talked about, protesting against this corrupt government that so much of the world is facing, and we face nowadays, and we see it so clearly now. And it's why punk is so important to keep alive, is because there's a little, and it's not going to be very niche, I'm sorry, respect existence or expect resistance. There's always going to be something to protest about, and our right to protest is so important. But I'm not going to go into what punk looks like today. I'm sorry. There is a lot to cover on how punk looks today, because it looks so similar, and yet it looks so different and so distant to what the 70s had placed, and that's not a bad thing. Just like how the 90s had their own spin on punk by keeping the same ideologies as the 70s did. But it's a whole other can of worms that I'm not opening right now. I'm not hungry. The most punk rock thing you can do is be kind. Having these ideologies And having strong opinions doesn't make you a bad person. And not having these opinions, it doesn't make you a bad person. I would like to say I am punk. Do I know everything about it? No. Will I ever? I hope so. I hope that the punk community and the goth community can really grow into this united community and not the separated community it can be. I will get into a little bit of the reason that punk became a thing was because of the oppression that the people felt in their everyday lives, that they faced in their everyday lives. Who Margaret Thatcher was now, and why she influenced the punk movement. Here are 10 main reasons why Margaret Thatcher was one of the most hated prime ministers of the UK. She supported the retention of capital punishment. She destroyed Britain's manufacturing industry. Her policies led to mass unemployment. She provided interest rates of 15%. She voted against relaxation of divorce laws. She abolished free milk for children in school. She precipitated a social housing crisis still being felt today. The poll tax. She sowed the seeds of NHS privatisation, her quiet homophobia, and the Irish hunger strikes. Let's keep going. We all know what capital punishment is. She destroyed so much employment. She presided over interest rates of 15%, taxing first-time homeowners, which led them to be homeless because they couldn't keep up with these rates of tax. Bulk repossessions happening daily under her command. She voted against divorce laws. It was basically the construct of having a guilty party and an innocent party, and a guilty party couldn't divorce the innocent party. Right. Abolishing free milk for school children. There were cuts in 4 areas of the children's education system: further education fees, library book borrowing charges, school meals charges, and no more free school milk. And, this seems like a small thing, but is not just milk. It's their right to be fed at school. She was one of the reasons that we have such a horrific housing crisis today. I don't live in the UK, but I live in a place that suffers from the housing crisis, and I'm under the UK is my motherland. It's terrible. I don't think in my life I'll ever own a house. The poll tax, which basically moved the burden of tax from the rich to the poor. And what do the poor not have an abundance of? Money. And what is a tax? Money. So thanks, Margaret. Sowing the seeds of the NHS, which NHS is the National Health Service, and basically, I'll direct this quote: although they initially helped primary care groups with needs assessment, they were to ultimately take on a more managerial role, determining local targets and standards. We're going to move on to her quiet homophobia. Obviously, queer spaces, and I haven't talked about this a lot in this video, but queer history is such a fundamental part of the punk and any alternative music, any media you consume that is even slightly alternative. It is influenced by queer people, and not recognizing that is something that so many people do when talking about the punk movement. It's everything is influenced by queer history. Section 28 of the Local Government Act in 1988 states, a local authority shall not, A, intentionally promote homosexuality or publish material with the intention of promoting homosexuality. B, promote the teaching in any maintained school of the acceptability of homosexuality as a pretended family relationship. Oh, Margaret. Yeah, okay. And then last of all we have, which is not last of all, but what I'm talking about today, we have the Irish hunger strikes. in 1981, the Irish hunger strikes was it's this long history of a protestation against basically being prisoners to war. It's not something I'm super aware of, so if I'm wrong, please excuse me. There are better sources to get this from, but this is what I have currently. Their goals were to have the right to not wear prison uniform, the right not to do prison work, the right to free association with other prisoners, and to organize educational and recreational pursuits, the right to one visit, one letter, and one parcel per week, full restoration of remission lost through the protest. These people were prisoners. They were, in a basic term, political prisoners, and they had that status. And the complex state and the complex development in these events led to the deaths of 10 prisoners. And after someone had gained a more powerful role, someone who was one of these prisoners had gained a more powerful recognition, Thatcher's response to this was, "We are not prepared to consider special category status for certain groups of people serving sentences of crime. Crime is crime is crime. It is not political." Another quote I will use from this is, "Her tone in May 1981 was at times morbid, even as the hunger strikes began to die, one after another. Faced with the failure of their discredited cause, the men of violence have chosen in recent months to play with what may well be their last card." Following one of the prisoners' deaths, she coolly stated to the House of Commons, "Mr. Stans was a convicted criminal. He chose to take his own life. It was a choice that his organisation did not allow to many of its victims." Later on, Republican writer Danny Morrison's now famous quote describes Thatcher as the biggest bastard we have known. And I think that sums up Margaret Thatcher's kind of rule. And by reading those and kind of giving you some evidence, I think you can understand why she had a huge influence on punk culture, because as the punk culture was thriving, this was happening. And the hunger strikes were, and I explained them horribly, the hunger strikes, they're an act of rebellion. They're an act of rebellion against a suffocating, oppressive leader. That's exactly what Margaret Thatcher was. So... Guys, I have to apologize. I did not record an outro. This is Editing Lola. I am grateful for all of you watching. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed, please let me know, because I'd love to make more videos like this. And if you have any topics you want me to cover, also let me know. I am sorry if this video takes a while to come out. Some stuff happened and I kind of fractured my arm, but it's here, and thanks for being patient with me, and thanks for tuning in. I'll see you guys next video.